Blessings and welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in Matthew chapter 1 verses 18 through chapter 2 verse 23, and then we read read all of chapter 2 in Luke. And today's read was just, they're always cool reads. Today there was just something about this thread of God's sovereignty and how He controlled and protected as we go through the story of the birth of Jesus. Jesus is an infant. He's fully God, fully man, but as an infant, he's vulnerable, really vulnerable. And the angels, and I thank God, protected him and directed the path of everyone around him to make sure that he got to the age of in his 30s where he could carry out his ministry. And it's just really cool the way this works out. Very end, we'll have a little law enforcement takeaway that is, again, truly one of my favorites in the Bible. But starting in Matthew chapter 1 verse 19, Mary's found to be pregnant. And when it says she was found, it's almost like she was found out. Like she didn't tell anybody, but people knew. I guess they could see the bump or whatever, but they found out that she was pregnant. And Joseph, it just says he wanted to protect her. He's a good man. He wants to do the right thing. And I just love reading about Joseph wanting to protect his what was going to be his future wife, but he wanted, I don't know the culture and how things worked out back then, but he wanted to protect her. Simple as that. Verse 20, the angel speaks to Joseph, and the angel addresses Joseph's fear, not, and by fear, I wonder if it's just fear of culture, what people are going to think about him and her, what they're going to say about him and her. How do you start a life off with that kind of a label that she's pregnant, but not by the man who's supposed to be her husband? But the angel speaks to that fear. And that's what it mentions. It doesn't mention the angel spoke to Joseph about his anger at Mary for being pregnant, or that Joseph's jealousy. It didn't speak to anything like that. It speaks to Joseph's fear, the angel does. And I think that's very telling. Then in verse 23, the angel quoted prophecy to Joseph, prophecy to a righteous man from the line of Judah, prophecy that he would know and understand and hear from an angel, the confirmation that it's going to be okay. And this is the promised Messiah. The fact that the angel quoted prophecy to Joseph just makes you realize the angel did that for a reason. Joseph would have known. Joseph was a righteous guy. I love his character. Verse 24 says he was obedient, not to mention he was just a good man. And then chapter 2, verse 2, the Magi from the East. Such a great study that I wish I had time, because I would like to talk about that. The Magi from the East come from a group of men that history likes to say this is a group that Daniel started when he was in Babylon, and he trained them, and they passed these trainings and these traditions down to the point where they knew the star meant that Jesus was going to be born, and they followed that star. They got all that knowledge and understanding from Daniel, who started this group. Anyway, another story for another time, but really cool if you ever decide to research that on your own. And then in 2:4, I always think in chapter 2, verse 4, this could have been such a great moment for Israel in their history, because the wise men of Israel, not just the wise men of the East, but the priests and the Levites, the king calls them together and they say, yes, this is a real event. The Messiah is about to be born in Bethlehem. And instead of saying, man, tell the nation, let's get together and let's worship him, it's let's see if we can kill him and maintain our current authority so he doesn't try and push us out. This is a baby. He's not going to come into power for 30 years, but they want to kill him right now. And those are thoughts from the enemy. 52:5, even the prophecies foretell of it. You wonder why this word didn't spread. But anyway, we see the story of the birth of Christ. It's such a cool story. You all know it. All these dreams that the angel gives Joseph of move here and move there. This is what I'm talking about. God is controlling and protecting. Takes them out of Jerusalem, sends them to Egypt, then brings them back out of Egypt. And then there's another ruler, so they wind up being in Nazareth, and just exactly where God wants them to be. But really cool how all this unfolds according to God's plan. Luke chapter 2 verse 1, we see God still making things happen. Verse 4, Joseph, we see from right here that he's part of the family of David, and we know Jesus comes from the family of David. And then real quick, I want to get into chapter 2, Luke 2 verse 8. It talks about the shepherds watching their flocks by night. Shepherds are men who protect and watch over. I always think of, Dave Grossman talks about the sheepdog, and that's kind of the sheepdog mentality of how we look out for the flock, and we take care of the people of our community, and we protect them. Well, that's what shepherds do. And this is a group of shepherds working the midnight shift. We're up all night with the sheep, and I worked midnights for years. But always around Christmas time, I loved reading this story because it made me think of all the cops that work nights, especially during the holidays. But for me, that's a cool law enforcement takeaway. Hope it is for you as well. Tomorrow, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 3, verse 1, all the way through chapter 3 to chapter 4, verse 11. We're going to go to Mark and read chapter 1, verse 2, all the way through verse 13. So chapter 1, verses 2 through 13. Then in Luke chapter 3, verses 1 through 23, and chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. And then John chapter 1, verses 19 through 34. It'll all be on the last slide here as we close out. But in the meantime, you guys be safe.